The sun was shining brightly on the small church, casting its warm glow over the neatly arranged pews, the white lila adorning the aisles, and the soft hum of excitement that filled the air. It was the kind of day that felt like it belonged in a fairy tale, a beautiful wedding, the promise of forever, and a crowd eager to witness the union of Emily and Mark. Emily stood at the altar, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the bouquet of white roses. The wedding dress, a vision of lace and satin, fit her perfectly, hugging her slender frame as though it had been made just for this moment. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, not from excitement, but from something much heavier. She glanced at Mark, standing tall and proud, his smile broad, but his eyes betraying no real emotion. It was as if this day was just another step in a carefully planned life. Her eyes drifted over the audience. Her mother was sitting in the front row, her gaze fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her stomach churn. Her father, silent as always, stood beside her mother, his face etched with quiet approval. And then there were Mark's family, his father nodding in approval, his mother trying her best to hold back tears. They were all waiting for her to say the words that would seal her fate, words she had rehearsed in her mind for months, words she knew would make everything fall into place. The officiant cleared his throat, his voice soft but steady. "Emily, do you take Mark to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse?" The question felt like a weight on her chest, heavier than any physical burden she had ever felt. She swallowed hard, trying to push back the rising tide of panic. She could feel the sweat gathering at the back of her neck, her breath growing shallow. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls narrowing, the faces blurring. Her hands began to shake, and before she could stop herself, her vision blurred even more. Her chest tightened, and she gasped for air, desperately trying to steady herself. The room started spinning, the voices around her muffled and distant, as though they were coming from another world. She felt her knees buckle beneath her, and she could hear someone screaming her name, but it felt far away. Then everything went black. The next thing she knew, she was lying down the soft, cool surface beneath her, a stark contrast to the heat that had gripped her moments before. The murmur of voices came rushing back, the panic unmistakable in the tone. "Emily, Emily, are you all right?" Mark's voice was frantic, but it didn't sound concerned, more frustrated. She blinked, trying to focus, but her head was pounding. "What happened?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't scare me like that," Mark muttered, running his hands through his hair, his face a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. "You fainted. You can't just do that in the middle of our wedding." The words hit her like a slap. She had just fainted right there in front of everyone. She could feel the heat in her cheeks as her pulse quickened. How could she have done that? How could she let herself fall apart like that? The officiant was at her side now, his hands gentle on her shoulders, helping her sit up. "You should take a moment, dear. There's no rush." Emily's mind was racing. What was wrong with her? Why did she feel so trapped in this moment, like she couldn't breathe, couldn't move forward? She wanted to get up, to tell everyone she was fine, that she could continue the ceremony, that everything was okay. But she knew deep down it wasn't. She looked around the room, her gaze landing on her mother's face. Her expression was a mixture of concern and disappointment. Her father's eyes were unreadable, as always. The whole room felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for her to pull herself together and do what she was supposed to do. The expectations, the pressure, it was suffocating. Mark stepped forward, his hands on his hips. "Emily, what's going on? We're supposed to be starting our life together, and you're—" He trailed off, his voice a sharp edge that cut through the tension. She could see it now, his impatience, his frustration at the disruption. The ceremony had been planned to perfection, and now she had ruined it. I'm sorry, Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion, but her heart wasn't in it. She wasn't apologizing for fainting. She was apologizing for not being able to go through with this, for the secret that had been building inside her. Growing stronger with each passing day, she wanted to say something, anything that would explain what was happening. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain the knot in her chest, the terror that had gripped her as soon as she stepped into the church, the voice in her head telling her that this wasn't the life she was supposed to live? She couldn't. Not now, not in front of everyone. Not in front of Mark. I think I need a moment, she said quietly, standing up, her legs unsteady. She pushed past Mark and hurried out of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. She found herself in a small, private room off the side of the church, leaning against the cool wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind was spinning. She didn't know what had just happened, what was going on inside her. All she knew was that something wasn't right, and as she sat there, trying to collect herself, she heard the door creak open. She turned to see an older man standing in the doorway. His face was calm, but there was something about him, something that made her pause. "This wasn't your choice," he said quietly. The words caught her off guard, and she stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer immediately, just stepped further into the room, his gaze steady. For a moment, Emily wondered if she had imagined it. But the weight of his words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. Emily's pulse quickened as she stared at the man who had just entered the room. He wasn't anyone she recognized. His clothes were simple but neat: a worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and a pair of boots that seemed to have seen their fair share of roads. His hair was graying at the temples, and there was a calmness in his eyes, as though he had seen it all, yet remained untouched by it. She glanced back at the door, half expecting someone to follow him, maybe a nurse, or someone who had been alerted to her collapse. But no one came. Just this stranger standing there, looking at her with a kind of knowing that unsettled her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky. She hadn't expected anyone to come in here. She had hoped for a moment of quiet just to collect her thoughts, but this man, he felt out of place, like a character from a different story altogether. "My name's Jack," he said, his voice gentle but firm, the kind of voice that made you listen. "But it's not about me. It's about you, Emily." Her heart skipped a beat at the mention of her name. She hadn't told him who she was. No one had come to check on her, and the staff hadn't had time to gather information before she was escorted here. She took a cautious step back, her back pressing against the cold wall. "How do you know my name?" Jack simply smiled, as though the question was irrelevant, and took a seat in one of the nearby chairs. He didn't look threatening, if anything. He seemed oddly peaceful, but there was an undeniable weight to his presence. "I've been watching you for some time." The words hit her like a sudden gust of wind, knocking her off balance. Watching her? The thought made her skin crawl. Was he some sort of stalker? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. "You've been watching me? Why?" Jack met her gaze without hesitation, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been watching you live your life. The life you've been told to live, Emily. The life that isn't yours." Emily felt a pang in her chest. She wanted to argue, to stand up and defend herself. "I'm doing the right thing," she said, more to herself than to him. "This is what's expected of me. I've worked hard for this. I love Mark." Jack didn't respond to her words immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression softening. "I know you think that. I know you've convinced yourself that this is what you should want. But I see the fear in your eyes, the way you've been holding your breath, waiting for this day to end." She shook her head again, this time more violently, trying to push the feelings of doubt that had been crawling beneath the surface for so long. "You don't understand. she whispered, more to herself than to him. You don't understand what it's like to have everything planned for you, to have every step of your life mapped out, dot, dot. Asterisk Jack nodded, his face serious but not unkind. I understand more than you think. You've spent your life trying to please everyone else, your parents, Mark, society. You've been living their dream, not yours. His words felt like a pinprick, each one burrowing deeper into the thoughts that had been growing inside her for so long. The thoughts she had ignored because they seemed too big, too terrifying to confront. Emily's throat tightened. But I don't know who I am without them, she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice shocking her. The weight of everything she had been holding back poured out in a rush, and suddenly, she was no longer able to hold back the tears that had been threatening to fall. Jack remained quiet as she let the emotion wash over her. When she finally looked up, he was watching her with an understanding that felt almost foreign. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet understanding of her pain. You don't have to know right now, Jack said softly. You don't have to have everything figured out. But you do need to start asking yourself why you're doing this. Why you're going through with this wedding when your heart is telling you something completely different. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket. She had been so focused on making everything look perfect, on pleasing everyone around her, that she had lost sight of what she actually wanted, what she needed. But now that Jack had opened her eyes to it, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I'm scared, she admitted in a broken voice. I'm scared that if I don't marry Mark, I'll lose everything. My family, my friends, they'll all turn their backs on me. They'll never understand. Jack leaned back in his chair, giving her a moment to breathe. You think you'll lose everything if you walk away. But Emily, you've already lost yourself in this life. You've already given up so much of who you are just to make others happy. The tears came again, this time more freely. But I don't know who I am without all of them. Without Mark, without the wedding, the family, dot, dot, dot. Jack's expression softened, and he stood, walking slowly toward her. I'm not saying you have to throw everything away, but you need to start living for you, not for the people who have been telling you what to do your entire life. For the first time, Emily considered the possibility that her life didn't have to be mapped out in the way others had planned. For the first time, she realized that she could make her own choices, choose her own path, even if it meant facing the unknown. She didn't have to be trapped in the life others had created for her. Jack's next words were simple but profound. You deserve more than this, Emily. You deserve to be free. The weight of those words settled deep in her chest. She could feel the truth of them, the undeniable pull to finally listen to her heart instead of the voices around her. The decision was hers to make, and it was up to her to find the courage to face it. Emily stood in the small room, her thoughts swirling like a storm she couldn't control. Jack's words still echoed in her mind, each one a weight, each one a spark that lit a fire inside her. You deserve more than this. The phrase seemed to linger in the air, hanging over her like an invisible banner. It was a truth she had never dared to entertain, but now it felt like the only truth worth believing. She wiped the tears from her cheeks, taking slow, measured breaths, trying to steady the chaos inside her. Every fiber of her being felt torn between two worlds, one where she walked out of the room, back into the arms of Mark and her family, and one where she took a step into the unknown, where she chose herself for the first time in her life. The thought of walking away from the wedding, from everything she had been raised to believe was her path, terrified her. She could already hear the whispers in her head, the disappointment of her parents, the confusion of her friends, and worst of all, Mark's anger. He would never understand. How could he? He had always been the safe choice, the choice that everyone approved of. But was that enough? Was safety enough to silence the voice inside her that screamed for freedom, for authenticity? The silence in the room was deafening, and she felt herself growing smaller, shrinking into the weight of her indecision. Her heart beat erratically in her chest, and for a moment, she was back at the altar, her hands trembling, her breath shallow, the entire room watching her, waiting for her to say the words. I do. The words she had rehearsed, the words she knew would seal her fate. But now, those words felt hollow. She could no longer say them, not when everything inside her screamed that she wasn't ready. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the pressure, the expectation. Jack's face appeared in her mind again, calm, understanding, unwavering. You deserve more than this, but what if she was wrong? What if she was just being selfish? Her mind argued with itself, the guilt eating away at her. She had always done what was expected. She had always made the choices that kept everyone happy. Why was this so different? Why did it feel like the right thing to do was the hardest thing? The sound of footsteps outside the door jolted her out of her thoughts. She stiffened, her breath caught in her throat. It was Mark, she was sure of it. He had come to check on her, to make sure she was okay, to give her a reason to go back out there and finish what they had started. But could she? Could she really go back out there, back into that life, knowing what she now knew? Before she could stop herself, the door opened and Mark stepped in. His face was flushed with anger, his jaw clenched. Emily, what the hell is going on? His voice was harsh, the frustration in it unmistakable. You can't just collapse and run off like that. This is our wedding. We're supposed to... I can't marry you, Mark, Emily interrupted, her voice firm, though it trembled with the weight of the words. She didn't recognize the person who had just spoken. This wasn't the quiet, obedient Emily who had spent months preparing for this day. This was someone else, someone new. Mark's expression faltered for a split second, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then the anger resurfaced, sharper this time. What do you mean you can't? You're just going to leave me here, in front of all these people? After everything we've done? All the plans we've made? Emily stood her ground, the words falling from her mouth before she could stop them. I can't live a life that isn't mine. I can't marry someone because it's what's expected of me. I don't love you the way I should. And I've been lying to myself about it for too long. Mark's face went white, his lips pressed together in a tight line as he took a step back. He couldn't understand. She could see it in his eyes. He couldn't grasp the pain that had been festering inside her, the quiet desperation she had hidden so well for so long. He had been her safe choice, the right choice, the practical choice. But now, standing here, in this moment, Emily realized that wasn't enough. You're making a mistake, Mark said, his voice low, almost pleading. This is everything we've worked for, Emily, everything we've built. You can't just throw it all away. I'm not throwing it away, Emily replied, her voice softer now. I'm choosing something else. I'm choosing myself. The words hung in the air between them, the finality of them sinking in. Mark stood there for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Emily heard the footsteps fading down the hallway, and then... nothing but silence. She was alone. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of everything, her family's expectations. Her friend's judgment, Mark's hurt all fall away. It wasn't as simple as just walking away from the wedding. It was walking away from a life she had been told to want. And as terrifying as that was, there was a strange sense of relief that followed. It felt like she had finally breathed for the first time in a long while. Her legs felt weak beneath her, but she steadied herself, leaning against the wall. The tears that had been threatening to fall for so long finally came. But this time, they weren't tears of fear or regret. They were tears of release. She had made her choice, and though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew it was the only choice she could live with. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and stepped toward the door. The wedding was over, but her life was just beginning. The next few days felt like a blur, a haze of confusion and chaos as Emily faced the consequences of her decision. The town seemed smaller now, the streets a little quieter, and every glance from a passing stranger felt heavier. Her family, once her unwavering support system, was now a distant memory of expectations and judgments she could no longer carry. The calls and messages poured in her mother's voice, trembling with disbelief, her father's silent anger, and her friends' disapproving silence. They all had one question: why? But Emily couldn't answer them. Not yet. She didn't know why exactly, but the truth had been building up inside her for too long. And now that she had taken the first step toward freedom, toward choosing herself, she couldn't go back. Not to a life that wasn't hers. She spent the first few days alone, in the quiet comfort of her apartment, away from the world that seemed to be falling apart around her. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. But as the hours stretched into days, Emily found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the world to collapse, waiting for the aftermath of her actions to consume her. But it didn't come at first. The silence felt oppressive. The space around her seemed too vast, too empty, without the weight of obligation pressing down on her. She had lived for so long under the shadow of others' expectations that being alone, without a clear path laid out for her, was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in her life, she was free to choose her own direction. She spent long hours walking through the city, finding solace in the rhythm of her footsteps and the way the sun felt on her face when it broke through the clouds. She wandered through parks, sat in cafes, and people watched, trying to piece together a life that was truly her own. The world, once so rigid and confining, now seemed full of possibility. Yet the pain of loss lingered. She missed her family, the familiarity of her old life, and even Mark's presence, despite everything. But the absence of those things wasn't as painful as she had imagined. In their place, she felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet knowing that she was finally on the right path. Then, one morning, a message came through that made her heart race. It was from Jack, the stranger who had appeared on her wedding day. She hadn't seen or heard from him since that fateful afternoon. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made her pause. "I know this is a hard road ahead, but you're not alone. You have to trust that the hardest choices lead to the greatest freedom. Keep going." She sat with the message for a long time, rereading it, letting the words sink in. She didn't know why Jack had been there when he was, or how he had known exactly what she needed to hear. But there was something comforting in the simplicity of his message. It was a reminder that she had made the right choice, even when everything around her was uncertain. As the days turned into weeks, Emily began to rebuild her life one step at a time. She took a new job at a small art gallery, something that had always intrigued her, but never seemed practical enough to pursue. It wasn't a high-paying job, and it certainly wasn't what her family would have chosen for her, but it made her feel alive. She could finally breathe without the weight of someone else's dreams on her shoulders. She also started to reconnect with people outside her old circle, people who didn't expect her to be perfect, who didn't see her as a daughter or a fiancée, or a reflection of her family's success. These new connections felt real, raw, and genuine. They saw her for who she was, not who she was supposed to be. One evening, as Emily was closing up the gallery, she received a call from her mother. She hadn't heard from her in over a week, and the sound of her voice, tentative and strained, made her heart twist. "Emily, we need to talk," her mother said. The words heavy with something Emily couldn't quite place. "I'm listening," Emily replied, her voice calm but guarded. "I don't understand what you did," her mother continued, "but I've been thinking. I've been thinking about why you did it, why you left everything behind." Emily's stomach tightened. She wasn't sure she was ready for this conversation, but at the same time, she knew it was inevitable. And what have you concluded? There was a long pause, and for a moment, Emily thought her mother might hang up. But then her mother spoke again, softer this time. I don't agree with your choice, but maybe I've been too focused on what I wanted for you and not enough on what you needed. I think I understand now. Emily closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. For the first time in years, her mother had acknowledged her choices, had admitted that Emily's path was her own to choose. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it was something. It was the first crack in the wall that had kept her distant from her family for so long. I'm sorry, her mother whispered, for not seeing you sooner. I'm sorry too, Emily said, the words feeling strangely freeing as they left her mouth. But I'm finding my way now, and I need to do it on my own. They sat in silence for a moment before her mother spoke again, her voice softer. I know. Just promise me you won't lose yourself in all of this. I won't, Emily promised. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The phone call ended, and Emily sat back in her chair, letting the weight of the conversation settle over her. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was a beginning. A real one. And that was enough. As she sat in the gallery, the night stretching out before her, Emily smiled softly to herself. She didn't have it all figured out. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she was living her own life. And that was the only thing that mattered. The story of Emily's journey teaches us a powerful lesson. True freedom comes from choosing to live authentically, even when it means breaking away from the expectations of others. It's easy to get lost in the roles that society, family, or even our own past assign to us. But at some point, we all must face the truth that our happiness and peace are only found when we make decisions that align with who we truly are. Emily's decision to walk away from the life she was expected to lead wasn't easy. It cost her relationships, security, and comfort. But in choosing herself, she discovered strength, courage, and the freedom to create a life that was truly her own. Don't be afraid to question the life you've been handed. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that bring the most growth.